into the Russian plains and just buy them out. They put that out on Pravda not even a year ago. Why would they put that out? Well, for a variety of different reasons. Who knows? Maybe they're putting out feelers or something. But I'm just giving you an example. There's many different ways to put a message out that isn't directly at all, but yet it is, if you know what you're looking for. So they were talking about this, and I started scratching our heads. What are they talking about? Who's this guy, Joseph P. Farrell? Hogan we know about. Who's Joseph P. Farrell? And what's he talking about when it comes down to Russian scientists? Well, what he was talking about in regards to pyramid, this is one of the most famous Russian physicists was involved with this pyramid experiment lasting years. I mean, you don't tie up one of your top 10 physicists in some experiment that's something boneheaded. You're certainly not going to tie them up for very long if it's not going anywhere. That's kind of just common sense. If you're researching a weapon system and it's not going anywhere, well, they're going to pull it pretty quickly. If you're researching a weapon system and you're tying up a physicist for a long, long period of time, well, then it's going somewhere, isn't it? That's kind of common sense. And when it comes down to weapons development, especially something like Russia, or science development, something like Russia, we didn't know anything. In fact, we found out most of that when the Berlin Wall came down. When the Berlin Wall came down, they matched together Germany, East Germany, and East Germany was all communist, remember? And they started looking at all these records and everything. But anyways, Joseph P. Farrell dug through all this, and he speaks German. He knows a lot about ancient languages because he has a PhD from Oxford and Oxford in some type of religious study, some type of theology, believe it or not. So he knows a lot about ancient languages. And what his books were doing, when I looked at it, the first look, I laughed. You know, his hypothesis, he did something interesting, which we hadn't seen in alternative when you get into alternative history, you get some far out stuff. It doesn't matter whether it's the New Age stuff, it goes out there. But he did something interesting. He didn't extrapolate a lot of opinions. He's just proposing a hypothesis based on ancient texts and new interpretations based on what we know about where this physics is going now. In other words, well, let me give you an example. I'll give you an example that kind of blew my mind. He was talking about Himmler in the Second World War, and that's what he's big on, historical revisionist from the Second World War. What does that tie into the Great Pyramid? Well, that's a good question. that's where the head scratching began. Joseph P. Farrell started digging in the Second World War. And he started digging into stuff that came out after the reunification, stuff that no one could get their hands on. Since he reads German, he was at a big advantage. And I'm guessing he reads Russian and some ancient languages too. See, German had the foremost experts on Sumeria. They also had some of the foremost experts, even 300 years ago, on ancient Egypt. Even reading that, I mean, all kinds of different stuff. The Germans have always been on top of their game. Well, he was looking at World War II, and he's looking at this Himmler's group. And Himmler's group, the Ancestry Research Bureau, you might remember that they were basically there to document Aryan ancestry going back so long. And he looked at the original charter, and the original charter said, and everyone has noticed this, you know, Himmler sent all these groups all over the world. He sent them to Tibet. Maybe you remember that movie about the Nazis in Tibet. He sent them all over South America looking for stuff. He sent them all over the place. But no one ever really realized why, other than they were looking for these white gods, so to speak. But anyways, he looked at the original charter, and the original charter said, you know, basically they're here to research Aryan ancestry. But they weren't just limited to five centuries of the Reich or Germany 2,000 years or whatever. They were there open-ended. Aryan ancestry through whether it lead to occult or esoteric means, which is kind of famous in Hellboy. You know, the beginning of Hellboy, where you have Himmler's research bureau out there doing all kinds of weird occult stuff. But also there was another clause, and it's potential weaponization and the weapon potentials. And then there was you know, I don't know the exact phrase in German, but what they were doing is rereading ancient texts in a modern theme. They were rereading ancient texts in a way that we just couldn't get it through our heads. They weren't reading them as in, you know, this or that. They were reading them. They weren't reading them under what you see as what you get philosophy. They were reading it as a topological metaphor. In other words, they realized that there was an integration a high civilization, and everyone's heard of this, Atlantis. There's been called many names, a super high civilization that existed, some say 200,000 years ago. I don't know. I have no idea. But they thought it was serious. Many of you understand that. It doesn't matter what we believe. They were dead serious. But they were reading this stuff as a topological metaphor for a very advanced science. And they were interested in that science. But they also knew that there was a total integration between science, philosophy, and religion. So if you're laying out a religious document, if you're laying out a philosophy, well, then there must be a science involved in that as well. And that's what they were doing. And they were doing it in regards to the black sun. Now, where does the black sun come from? Well, if you look in Sumeria legend, I believe it is Marduk Marduk is very upset over the destruction of Sumeria. Don't know how long ago this was. It may have been 50,000 years ago. Maybe it never happened. Whatever. They believed it did, and he was upset over that. And the goddess, I think it was Ishtar, said, "Don't worry, that there is a light emanating, and that light will awaken a new Sumer in the future." And all this other stuff, but they extrapolated a science from that, and that's where this topic of the black sun comes from, that the light will yet again awaken, and this whole entire concept. But it was not just philosophy. They were laying it down as they believed they were laying it down like some kind of topological metaphor for them to find later, or something along those lines. And then, of course, you have the you have what I call the obvious, the what you see is what you get type stuff. Yes, they were reading it like a topological a metaphor, and nothing is more obvious when you read something like the Rig Veda. We think in terms of this happened at the Rig Veda was laid down 2000 BC, and it talks about some big warfare, and the Aryans came in there and crushed everything. Well, we don't know when that really happened. All we know is that the Hinduism was started then. Well, Hinduism was a mystery religion laid down from something probably previous. We don't know how long ago this war happened, but let me give you an example of what they were reading, and you can consider it for yourself. Victorious with the man hero in battles, thy bolt thou castest at the foe. Trample them down beneath thy foot, a conqueror scatterer art thou. Thou conquerest, boundest many tribes forever. Like castles thou hast crushed the godless races, and bowed the godless scorner's deadly weapon. You know, what type of weapon is that? I don't know. Well, listen to this. Thou hurlest forth from heaven the iron missile. Thou hurlest forth from heaven the iron missile. Bolt armed, ere darkness overtook the sunlight. Thou castest at the veiling cloud thy weapon. All our enemies who near or far away prevail against us, crush and leave them destitute. Against them send thy fiercest flaming weapon. Rend them from other, crush them and subdue them. And then the Rig Veda goes into all this other stuff. But this talk about this ancient war, and when we're talking ancient war, we're talking ancient. Joseph P. Farrell went into that in Cosmic War. Got a lot of attention. That guy has to, I don't know, he has to be watched night and day, because he's talking about stuff that when you talk about Europeans, it usually gets attention, because this stuff has been pretty much underground, I'm guessing, since World War II. But this type of thing in the Rig Veda was used in colonialism, that wordism. Yeah, they went and conquered India. But when you actually read the text, when you read it, when you read the Sumerian text, it's called the creation myth, the Enuma Elish. Well, there's only a certain portion that's creation. A lot of it sounds like outright war, and they're not talking about little weapons. I mean, what in 2000 BC they're talking about Indra slamming an iron missile. You heard it yourself. You can look it up. Thou hurlest forth from heaven the iron missile. Well, they're not talking about little. They're not talking about little arrows. They're talking about destroying whole cities. They're talking about some pretty wild stuff. Well, we might look at that and say, yeah, whatever, what does that do for us? But the National Socialists didn't really do that. They said, of course, we're byproducts of these gods. They came to this planet and whatever, and we're going to figure out their weapon system, and we're going to start doing that. And lo and behold, they started firing missiles on London, firing a lot of missiles on London, and building bigger missiles. Yes, but where'd they get this at? Well, they got it from ancient texts, and which is kind of interesting. But you're dealing with the total integration between science, philosophy, and religion. And when I say science, even biology. Science includes biology, of course. But I can give you another example of this. The swastika. Everyone lists